A boy who is rushing to a charity food distribution point after days without a proper meal suddenly hears a desperate groan from a dark alley. Inside, a well-dressed woman is standing there, clutching her stomach in pain. Without hesitation, he helps her, calls a taxi, and takes her to the hospital, giving up the warm meal he has been dreaming of. What he doesn't know is that the woman is the mayor's wife. And when the mayor arrives at the hospital and hands him a single piece of paper, everything that follows will change his life forever. Before we dive in this story, let us know where you watching from. We love to hear your thought. The evening air carried the scent of grilled meat and fresh bread drifting down from Mayor Harrison's front lawn like a cruel promise. Elijah pressed his back against the cold brick wall of the alley, watching Jason count their group for the third time. 16 of us, Jason said, his voice tight with excitement. They said there's food for at least 50 people. We'll actually get full tonight, man. Elijah nodded, but his stomach had already stopped growling. It had learned not to hope too loudly. At 16 years old, he'd spent the last 4 years on these streets, and free food always came with a price, even if it was just the weight of pitying stares. Come on, Marcus called from ahead, already moving toward the glow of string lights visible 3 blocks away. They're setting up the tables now. I can see them. The group started forward, a scattered line of bodies in mismatched clothes, some too big, some too small, all carrying the particular tiredness that comes from never really resting. Elijah fell into step beside Jason, his best friend since the night they'd shared a doorway during a thunderstorm 2 years ago. You think they'll have those little sandwiches? Jason asked. The ones with the toothpicks. Man, I don't care if it's bread and water, Elijah said. I'm just tired of being hungry. They turned onto Maple Street and the mayor's house came into view. It sat on the corner lot like a wedding cake, white columns gleaming under spotlights, lawn manicured into impossible perfection. Long tables stretched across the grass covered in white cloths that seemed to glow in the dusk. Volunteers in matching blue shirts moved between the tables, arranging plates and cups with the kind of care usually reserved for museum exhibits. Look at all that, Marcus breathed. It's like a dream. Elijah's chest tightened. It did look like a dream. The kind you wake up from. They were still half a block away when Elijah heard it. A sound that didn't belong to the evening's carefully orchestrated charity. A moan, low and desperate, coming from the narrow gap between 2 buildings on his right. He stopped walking. Elijah, Jason turned back. What's wrong? You hear that? Jason listened, then shook his head. Hear what? Come on, man, they're already lining up. The sound came again, sharper this time. Elijah's feet moved before his brain caught up. He stepped into the gap between buildings, into shadows that the streetlights couldn't reach. She was there, pressed against the brick wall like she was trying to disappear into it. A woman, maybe 45, maybe 50, dressed in clothes that screamed money and power. A gray blazer perfectly pressed, a silk blouse, pearl earrings that caught what little light filtered in. But her face was twisted in agony, one arm wrapped around her stomach, the other hand braced against the wall to keep herself upright. Ma'am, Elijah's voice came out softer than he intended. Are you okay? Her head snapped up and for a moment he saw pure fear in her eyes. Not fear of him. Fear of being seen. Go away, she managed, but her voice cracked on the second word. Another wave of pain must have hit because she doubled over, a sound escaping her throat that was barely human. Elijah looked back toward the street. He could see his friends getting smaller in the distance, moving toward the lights and the food and the one good thing that had happened all month. His stomach cramped, empty and angry. He looked back at the woman. You need a hospital, he said. No, the word came out sharp, almost violent. No hospitals, no ambulances, no one can know. Ma'am, you're really hurt, I said no one can know. She tried to straighten up, tried to put command back in her voice, but another spasm hit and she sagged against the wall. When she spoke again, her voice was smaller, almost pleading. Please, just help me get to a taxi. Just get me there quietly. I'll pay you, whatever you want. Elijah's mind raced. The party was starting. Jason and the others were probably already in line. The smell of food seemed to intensify, mocking him from 3 blocks away. Please, the woman whispered again, and this time there were tears on her face. Elijah stepped forward and gently took her arm. Okay, I've got you. She leaned her weight against him and he nearly buckled. She was heavier than she looked, or maybe he was just that weak from hunger. They moved together toward the street, slow and awkward, her breathing ragged in his ear. "There's a taxi stand 2 blocks south," she managed between breaths. "Can you get me there?" "Yes, ma'am." They emerged onto the sidewalk and Elijah could see it all clearly now. The party in full swing, the line of people being served. Jason at the front, reaching for a plate piled high with food. The volunteers smiling their rehearsed smiles. Cameras flashing as the mayor himself appeared, shaking hands, posing for pictures with the grateful homeless. The woman in his arms moaned again and Elijah turned his back on all of it. The 2 blocks felt like 2 miles. She stumbled twice and each time Elijah caught her, held her up, whispered things he didn't even remember. "Almost there, you're doing good. Just a little more." When they reached the taxi stand, a yellow cab was idling at the curb. Elijah waved frantically, and the driver looked up from his phone. "St. Mary's Hospital," the woman gasped as Elijah helped her into the back seat. "Emergency entrance." The driver's eyes widened. "Lady, you need an ambulance." "I need you to drive," she said, and even in pain there was steel in her voice. Elijah started to close the door, but her hand shot out and grabbed his wrist. Her grip was surprisingly strong. "Come with me," she said. "Please, I don't want to be alone." He should have said no. He should have run back to the party, grabbed whatever scraps were left. But something in her eyes reminded him of the way his own mother used to look, in those last days before she'd gotten too sick to look at anything at all. "Okay," he heard himself say, and he climbed in beside her. The taxi pulled away from the curb, and through the rear window, Elijah watched the string lights of the mayor's lawn party grow smaller and smaller until they were just a warm glow in the distance, unreachable as stars. In the back seat, the woman cried, not from pain this time, though Elijah could tell that was still there, radiating from her in waves. These were different tears, quieter, more broken. "I'm sorry," she whispered, though Elijah wasn't sure who she was apologizing to. "I'm so sorry. I'm not supposed to be weak. I can't be weak. He says I can't ever be weak." Elijah didn't know what to say to that, so he just sat there, this strange woman's pain filling the space between them, and watched the city lights blur past the window. Mary's Hospital appeared too quickly, and not quickly enough. The driver pulled up to the emergency entrance, and Elijah helped the woman out, supporting her weight as they pushed through the automatic doors. The emergency room was half empty, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead like dying insects. A nurse at the intake desk looked up, her expression shifting from bored to alarmed in half a second. "I need help," the woman managed. "Please." The nurse stood quickly, but then she froze. Her eyes went wide, recognition flooding her face. "Mrs. Harrison." The woman, Margaret Harrison, wife of the mayor, closed her eyes as if hearing her own name caused physical pain. "Please," she said again, quieter this time. "Can we be discreet?" The nurse hesitated for just a moment, then nodded. "Of course, let me get a wheelchair." Things moved quickly after that. A wheelchair appeared. Then a doctor. Then Margaret was being rolled away through double doors that swung shut behind her with a soft pneumatic hiss. Elijah stood in the middle of the waiting room, suddenly aware of how out of place he was. His clothes were dirty. He probably smelled. A security guard by the door was already watching him with narrowed eyes, but before he could decide whether to leave, a different nurse appeared. "Are you the young man who brought Mrs. Harrison in?" "Yes, ma'am. She's asking for you. She says she wants you to stay until she's stable." Elijah blinked. "She wants me to stay." "That's what she said." The nurse studied him for a moment, her expression softening. "There's a vending machine down that hall. You look like you could use something to eat." She pressed a $5 bill into his hand before he could protest, then disappeared back through the double doors. Elijah stood there, holding the money, feeling its weight like an accusation. $5. Enough for chips and a soda, not even close to what he'd missed at the party. He walked to the vending machine anyway, bought a bag of pretzels and a bottle of water, and sat down in one of the plastic chairs to wait. Hours passed. The waiting room filled and emptied, filled and emptied. A man with a broken arm, a child with a fever, an old woman who couldn't stop coughing. Elijah watched them all come and go, each one called back behind those double doors, each one eventually emerging, better or worse but at least moving forward. It was nearly midnight when the nurse came back out. "She's stable now," she said. "Resting." She wanted me to tell you thank you and to give you this. She handed him $40 in cash. Elijah stared at the bills. I didn't do it for money. I know, the nurse said gently. But take it anyway. She wanted you to have it. He folded the bills and put them in his pocket, feeling strange and hollow and not at all like someone who'd just done a good deed. Outside the hospital, the night had grown cold. Elijah started the long walk back to the underpass where he usually slept, where Jason and the others would already be curled up in their sleeping bags, stomachs full for the first time in weeks. He tried not to think about what he'd missed, tried not to calculate the cost of his choice in plates of food and warm bread and the particular kind of sleep that comes from not being hungry. But his stomach growled anyway, and the pretzels from the vending machine felt like a cruel joke rattling around in his empty belly. When he finally reached the underpass, everyone was asleep. Jason's sleeping bag was lumped in the usual spot, rising and falling with the deep breathing of someone well-fed and content. On the ground beside him were 3 paper plates, scraped clean but still bearing the grease stains of whatever feast had been served. Elijah spread out his own thin blanket in the corner and lay down. The concrete was cold against his back. The $40 in his pocket felt heavier than it should. He closed his eyes and tried to sleep, but all he could see was Margaret Harrison's face, twisted in pain and fear, and something else he couldn't quite name. And her words kept echoing in his head, over and over. I'm not supposed to be weak. I can't be weak. He says I can't ever be weak. Somewhere above him, through the lattice of the overpass, stars moved slowly across the sky, cold and distant and offering no answers at all. 3 days passed before Elijah saw her again. He'd almost convinced himself it had been a dream, that strange night with the woman in the alley. But the $40 was real, slowly shrinking as he bought day-old bread from the convenience store and shared it with Jason and Marcus and the others. Where'd you get the money anyway? Jason had asked on the second day, suspicious in the way that people get when good fortune appears out of nowhere. Help someone, Elijah said, which was true enough. Help them do what? Does it matter? Jason had shrugged and taken another bite of bread, and Elijah had felt the lies settle between them like dust. On the 3rd day, Elijah was sitting outside the public library, trying to stay warm in the weak afternoon sun, when a black town car pulled up to the curb. The back window rolled down and there she was. Margaret Harrison looked different in daylight. Smaller somehow. The gray blazer had been replaced by a cream-colored cardigan, but her makeup was perfect, her hair styled in a way that probably took an hour to achieve. She looked like someone who'd never been in pain a day in her life. Elijah, she said, and he realized with a start that she knew his name. He'd never told her his name. Ma'am, can we talk? Just for a moment, he glanced around. The library steps were empty except for an old man feeding pigeons 20 feet away. Still, being seen getting into a town car felt dangerous in ways he couldn't quite articulate. It's okay, Margaret said, reading his hesitation. I just want to explain some things. To thank you properly. Against his better judgment, Elijah stood and walked to the car. The door opened from inside and he slid onto leather seats that were softer than any bed he'd ever slept in. Margaret sat across from him, her hands folded in her lap, everything about her posture suggesting control. But Elijah remembered those other hands, the ones that had gripped his wrist in the taxi, desperate and afraid. How are you feeling? He asked. A smile flickered across her face, brief and sad. Better, thanks to you. She paused, studying him. The hospital told me you stayed for 5 hours. You didn't have to do that. You asked me to. Most people wouldn't have listened. Elijah didn't know what to say to that, so he stayed quiet. Margaret's smile faded. She looked out the window at the library, at the homeless man with his pigeons, at everything except Elijah's face. I have a tumor, she said finally, her voice flat and clinical. Benign, thank God, but it's pressing on things it shouldn't press on. The pain comes in cycles. Sometimes I'm fine for weeks. Other times, she gestured vaguely, indicating what Elijah had witnessed in the alley. Can't they remove it? They can. They should. But surgery means recovery time. Weeks of recovery time. Now she did look at him, and her eyes were hard. My husband doesn't think I can afford to be absent that long. The way she said my husband made those 2 words sound like a prison sentence. Your husband, Elijah repeated slowly. The mayor, yes, he knows you're sick. He knows. Margaret's laugh was bitter. He knows, and he's decided it's not convenient, not right now. Not with the election coming up, not with the community programs expanding, not with all eyes on our family. He needs me healthy and present and smiling for the cameras. Elijah felt something cold settle in his stomach. So you just deal with the pain. I deal with it quietly, she corrected. That's the important part. Quietly, no fuss, no ambulances, no dramatic hospital visits that might raise questions. She looked down at her hands. The other night, you saw me at my worst. I'd been managing the pain with medication, but that night it broke through everything. I couldn't get home, couldn't call anyone, couldn't be seen. That's why you were hiding in an alley. That's why I was hiding in an alley. She met his eyes again. And that's why I'm so grateful you were there. Most people would have just walked past. Most people were at the party, Elijah said, letting just a hint of edge creep into his voice. Margaret winced. I know you missed it. That's actually part of why I wanted to talk to you. She reached into her purse and pulled out an envelope. This is $500. I want you to have it. Elijah stared at the envelope, like it might bite him. Ma'am, I can't, please. You saved me, and you lost something because of it. Let me make that right. It's too much. It's not nearly enough. When he still didn't reach for it, she set it on the seat between them. At least think about it. Please. The car fell into silence. Outside, the pigeon man scattered another handful of seeds, and birds descended in a flutter of gray wings. Can I ask you something? Elijah said finally. Of course, that night in the taxi, you said you weren't supposed to be weak. You said he says you can't be weak. Did you mean the mayor? Margaret's face went very still. For a long moment, she didn't answer, and Elijah thought maybe he'd pushed too far, asked the question that would get him thrown out of this nice car and back onto the street where he belonged. But then she spoke, and her voice was so quiet he had to lean forward to hear it. My husband believes that people in positions of responsibility can't afford weakness. Not physical weakness, not emotional weakness, not any kind of vulnerability. He says it's part of the job. That people look to us to be strong, to be certain, to never falter. She paused. I used to think he was right. I used to think strength meant never showing pain. And now I hide in alleys and hope no one sees me fall apart. The smile that crossed her face was the saddest thing Elijah had ever seen. I'm not sure what that says about strength. Elijah picked up the envelope, not because he wanted it, but because leaving it there felt like leaving a piece of himself behind. Thank you, he said. No, Margaret replied. Thank you, for seeing me when I needed to be seen, for not looking away. She knocked on the partition, and the driver started the engine. The door locks clicked open. Take care of yourself, Elijah, Margaret said as he climbed out. You're a good person, don't let this city take that from you. The car pulled away, leaving Elijah standing on the sidewalk with $500 in his hand and a strange weight in his chest that he couldn't name. He didn't know it yet, but 3 blocks away, in the mayor's office, a different conversation was taking place. Mayor Richard Harrison sat behind his desk, reading the hospital report that his secretary had discreetly obtained. His wife's name was on it. And below that, in the notes section, a brief description of the young man who'd brought her in. Black male, approximately 16 years old, homeless based on appearance, stayed until patient was stable. Richard Harrison leaned back in his leather chair and steepled his fingers, thinking. He'd spent 20 years in politics, and if there was one thing he'd learned, it was that every person had a use. Every situation could be turned to advantage. His wife's little episode had been unfortunate, yes, but perhaps it didn't have to be a complete waste. A homeless teenager who helped a woman in need, who missed a charity dinner to make sure she got to the hospital, who stayed for hours without asking for anything in return. That was a story. That was a narrative, and narratives, properly controlled, were more valuable than gold. Richard picked up his phone and dialed his communications director. Sarah, I need you to look into something for me. There's a young man, first name Elijah, probably hangs around the downtown area. He glanced at the report again. I want to know everything about him. Who his friends are, where he sleeps, what he does with his time. And Sarah, do it quietly. I don't want him spooked. He hung up and turned his chair to face the window, looking out over the city he'd governed for 8 years. Somewhere out there, Elijah was probably spending that $500, thinking he'd gotten lucky, thinking his good deed had been rewarded. Richard Harrison smiled. The boy had no idea how useful he was about to become. The letter arrived 1 week later, slipped under the tarp that served as Elijah's makeshift tent under the overpass. He woke to find it there, a cream-colored envelope with his name written in elegant script across the front. Just his first name, no address. Someone had hand-delivered it while he slept, which should have frightened him more than it did. Jason was already awake, boiling water for instant coffee over a small camping stove he'd traded for last month. You got mail, Jason said, nodding toward the envelope. Fancy. Elijah sat up, every muscle in his body protesting the night spent on concrete. He picked up the envelope carefully, half expecting it to disappear like smoke. Inside was a single sheet of paper, the same cream color as the envelope, and a message written in the same elegant hand. Dear Elijah, I hope this letter finds you well. I've been thinking about our conversation, and I realize I may have left you with the wrong impression. The money was a thank you, nothing more, but I'd like to offer you something more substantial if you're interested. The Mercy House Community Center is a program I oversee. We provide housing, job training, and educational support for young people in difficult situations. I believe you would be an excellent candidate for the program. If you're interested, please come to the address below tomorrow at 2 p.m. No pressure, no obligation, just an opportunity. Sincerely, Margaret Harrison. Below that was an address in the north part of the city, the part where the streets had trees and the buildings didn't have bars on the windows. What is it? Jason asked, trying to sound casual but failing. A job thing, maybe. Elijah folded the letter and put it back in the envelope. Probably nothing. Let me see. Elijah hesitated, then handed it over. Jason read it quickly, his expression shifting from curiosity to something harder. Mercy House, he said. I've heard of that place. It's legit. They actually help people. He looked up at Elijah. How do you know Margaret Harrison? I helped her with something. What kind of something gets you a personal invitation to a city program? The kind where I helped her when she needed help, and now she wants to return the favor. That's it. Jason stared at him for a long moment, then handed back the letter. You're gonna go, right? I don't know. Maybe. Jason's voice rose. Man, this is a way out. An actual way out. You'd be crazy not to go. What about you? What about Marcus and everyone else? What about us? We'll manage. We always do. But Jason's voice had gone flat, and Elijah knew that tone. It was the voice his friend used when he was lying to himself. I'll think about it, Elijah said, and the conversation died there. But he was already thinking about it. All day, through the hours spent sitting outside the convenience store hoping for spare change, through the shared dinner of canned soup and stale crackers, through the endless empty evening when time moved like cold honey. He was thinking about a bed, a real bed, about learning something that might lead to a job that might lead to a life that looked different from this. At 1:55 p.m. the next day, Elijah stood in front of Mercy House Community Center. It was a renovated 3-story building, brick painted clean white, with wide windows that let in so much light it seemed to glow from within. A sign by the door read, "Everyone deserves a second chance." Elijah almost turned around 3 times before his hand finally pushed open the door. Inside, the lobby was bright and warm. Bulletin boards covered one wall displaying notices about GED classes, job interviews, counseling services. A young woman sat at the front desk, and when she saw Elijah, she smiled. "You must be Elijah, Mrs. Harrison is expecting you." She led him down a hallway that smelled like fresh paint and hope, stopping at a door marked Director. She knocked twice. "Come in," Margaret's voice called. The office was smaller than Elijah had expected, but comfortable. Margaret sat behind a simple wooden desk, and when she saw him, genuine warmth crossed her face. "Elijah, thank you for coming." She gestured to the chair across from her. "Please, sit." He sat, feeling like an imposter in his worn-out jeans and jacket that had been through too many winters. Margaret folded her hands on the desk, and for a moment Elijah saw the careful control from the town car, but then she seemed to make a decision, and her posture relaxed slightly. "I'm going to be honest with you," she said. "I want to help you because you helped me, but there's more to it than that." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "My husband knows about you." Elijah felt his stomach drop. "How?" "The hospital keeps records. He has access to those records." She held up a hand before Elijah could panic. "He doesn't know details. He doesn't know about my tumor, or why I was really there. He just knows that a young man brought me in, and that the young man was you. Is that bad?" "I'm not sure yet," Margaret admitted. "Richard sees opportunity in everything. He's already talking about expanding the youth outreach programs, about finding success stories to highlight. And he's mentioned you." "Me? But he doesn't even know me. That's what worries me." Margaret leaned forward, her voice dropping. "My husband is very good at using people. He'll frame it as helping, as giving you a chance, but there's always an angle, always something he wants in return. So why are you offering me this spot at Mercy House? Because if you're going to be drawn into his orbit, I want you somewhere I can watch over you, somewhere you'll have actual support instead of just being a prop for photo opportunities." Her eyes were fierce now. "I couldn't protect myself from him, Elijah. But maybe I can protect you." The honesty of it hit Elijah like cold water. This wasn't charity, this was strategy. "What if I say no?" he asked. "Then you say no. You walk out that door, and I'll never contact you again." Margaret's expression softened. "But I hope you don't. Not because I need you here, but because I think you deserve better than sleeping under an overpass. And whatever my husband's motives are, Mercy House itself is real. The help is real." Elijah thought about Jason, still under the bridge, about Marcus and the others, still scrambling for every meal, about the way his back ached every morning from concrete and cold. "What would I have to do?" he asked. "Participate in the program. That means GED classes 3 days a week, job training, counseling sessions if you want them. You'd have a private room, 3 meals a day, and a small weekly stipend for personal expenses." She pulled out a folder and slid it across the desk. "Everything is laid out here. No tricks, no hidden clauses." Elijah opened the folder, scanning the papers inside. It all looked legitimate, almost too good to be true. "Can I think about it?" "Of course, take the folder with you. Come back tomorrow if you decide yes, or don't come back at all if you decide no." Margaret stood, extending her hand. "Either way, Elijah, I meant what I said in the car. You're a good person, that matters more than you know." He shook her hand, feeling the weight of everything unsaid between them, and left, but he knew, even as he walked back toward the underpass, that he was going to say yes, not because he trusted Mayor Harrison, or even fully trusted Margaret, but because sleeping on concrete was killing him, slowly but surely, and he wanted to live. When he got back to the bridge, Jason was waiting, sitting on his sleeping bag with his arms wrapped around his knees. "So?" Jason asked. "I'm going to do it," Elijah said. Jason nodded slowly. "Yeah, I figured." He tried to smile but it came out wrong. "That's good, man. Really good." But Elijah could hear the thing Jason wasn't saying, could feel the distance already forming between them, like ice spreading across a winter pond. "You could apply too," Elijah said, even though he knew it was a useless offer. "They have openings." "Yeah, maybe," Jason said, but they both knew he wouldn't. That night, Elijah lay awake long after everyone else had fallen asleep, listening to the traffic overhead and thinking about the choice he'd made. He didn't know yet that 3 days from now, his picture would be in the newspaper. That the headline would read, "From Streets to Success, Mayor's Youth Program Gives Teen a Second Chance." He didn't know that Jason would see that article and feel something cold and bitter take root in his chest. He didn't know that Mayor Richard Harrison was already writing the speech he'd give, the one where he'd stand next to Elijah and talk about compassion and opportunity and the American dream, and every word would be true, except for the parts that mattered. All Elijah knew was that tomorrow he'd have a bed, and tonight, that was enough. 2 weeks into the program, Elijah barely recognized his own reflection. The face staring back from the bathroom mirror looked cleaner, healthier, almost like someone else. Regular meals had put color back in his cheeks. Sleep on an actual mattress had erased the shadows under his eyes. Even his posture had changed. No longer hunched against weather and threat. He should have felt grateful. He should have felt lucky, instead he felt guilty every single day. The knock on his door came during his free hour between GED class and job training. Marcus stood in the hallway, shifting his weight from foot to foot, looking everywhere except at Elijah's face. "Hey," Marcus said, "Jason's downstairs, he wants to talk to you." Elijah's stomach dropped. He'd seen Jason only twice since moving into Mercy House, and both times had been awkward, full of silences that felt like accusations. "Tell him I'll be right down." 5 minutes later, Elijah found Jason in the common area, standing near the bulletin board and staring at the notices like they were written in a foreign language. When he heard Elijah approach, he turned, and Elijah saw that his friend had a folder in his hands. "Hey," Elijah said. "Hey." Jason held up the folder. "I applied, like you said I should." Relief flooded through Elijah's chest. "That's great, man. That's really great." "Yeah, I thought so too." Jason's voice was flat. "I filled out all the forms. Got letters of recommendation from the shelter volunteers, from the guy at the library who lets me use the computers. Wrote this whole essay about my goals and stuff." He paused. "They sent me a response yesterday." Something in his tone made Elijah's relief curdle. And Jason opened the folder and pulled out a single sheet of paper. "Dear applicant, thank you for your interest in the Mercy House Community Center program. Unfortunately, we are unable to offer you a position at this time. While your application shows promise, you do not currently meet our eligibility criteria. We encourage you to reapply in the future." He lowered the paper. "That's it. No explanation, no criteria listed, just you don't qualify." "That doesn't make sense," Elijah said. "You qualify just as much as I do. More even. You've been on the streets longer, you're older, I've got what?" Jason's voice rose. "I've got the same story as you. The same background, the same skin color." He laughed sharp and bitter. "Oh wait, I do have all those things. So what's different, Elijah? What makes you special, and me not good enough?" "I don't know, but I can find out. I can talk to Mrs. Harrison. I can." "I already talked to Mrs. Harrison." Elijah froze. "When?" "This morning. I came by early before you were up. Asked her directly why I was rejected." Jason's hands clenched around the folder. "You know what she said? She said all decisions about admissions go through the mayor's office, that he has final approval on all candidates." "The mayor?" Something cold settled in Elijah's chest. Why would the mayor care about individual applicants? "That's what I asked." She got this look on her face, like she wanted to say something but couldn't. Finally she just said, "Some candidates fit the program's current narrative better than others." Jason's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. "Narrative, Elijah, like we're characters in some story he's writing." Elijah felt the walls of the common room pressing in. "Let me talk to him. Let me go to the mayor and explain that you're my friend, that you deserve this just as much." "No, Jason, please, just let me," I said. "No." The shout echoed in the quiet room. 2 other residents looked over, curious and wary. Jason lowered his voice, but the anger stayed. "You think he doesn't know about me? You think he didn't look at my application and decide I wasn't useful enough?" "I'm not asking for your help, Elijah. I'm not begging. I just came here to tell you that I see how this works now." "How? What works?" "This." Jason gestured around the common room, at the clean walls and the comfortable furniture and the bulletin board full of opportunities. "You got picked because you did one good thing that happened to involve the mayor's wife. You got picked because you're a good story. And I didn't get picked because I'm just another homeless kid without a story worth telling." "That's not true, isn't it?" Jason's eyes were bright with something that might have been tears or might have been rage. "Look at yourself, man. New clothes, full stomach, a future, and look at me." He gestured down at his worn jacket, his too thin frame. "Still the same, still invisible. The only difference between us is that you were in the right place at the right time, and I wasn't." "Jason, you're my best friend. You're not invisible to me, but I'm invisible to me, but I'm invisible to everyone who matters." Jason stuffed the rejection letter back into the folder. "You know what the worst part is? I'm not even mad at you. You didn't do anything wrong, you just got lucky, but I'm losing my best friend to that luck, and there's nothing I can do about it." "You're not losing me." "Yes, I am." Jason's voice cracked. "You're already different, you talk different, you stand different. In a month you won't even remember what it was like to sleep under that bridge. And I'll still be there, but you'll be here, and the space between those two places is bigger than you think. Elijah wanted to argue, wanted to insist that nothing had changed, that nothing would change. But the words stuck in his throat, because part of him knew Jason was right. I can still help, Elijah said desperately. I can share my stipend, I can. I don't want your charity, Jason said quietly. I wanted the same chance you got, but apparently that's not how this works. He turned and walked toward the door. Elijah followed, calling his name, but Jason didn't stop. He pushed through the main entrance and out into the cold afternoon, leaving Elijah standing in the doorway, watching his best friend disappear into the city. That night, Elijah knocked on Margaret Harrison's office door. She was still there despite the late hour, working through paperwork by the light of her desk lamp. Elijah, she said, looking up. Is everything all right? Why was Jason rejected? Margaret's expression didn't change, but something shifted in her eyes. I'm sorry, I can't discuss other applicants. He's my best friend. He deserves to be here. I know. The words came out soft and sad. I know he does. Then why isn't he? Margaret set down her pen and folded her hands on the desk, the same gesture Elijah had seen her make before. The one that meant she was about to say something she didn't want to say. My husband believes in narrative, she said finally. He believes that people respond to stories and stories need to be simple, clear, easy to understand. She paused. Your story is simple, Elijah. You're the homeless teen who helped a woman in need and got a second chance. That's a story people can understand and feel good about. And Jason doesn't add to that story, he complicates it. If we bring in your friend, suddenly the narrative isn't about you being special. It's about us helping multiple people, which is less impactful, less personal. Margaret's voice was bitter now. Richard thinks in terms of headlines, and Mayor's program helps one deserving teen is a better headline than Mayor's program helps several teens. The unfairness of it hit Elijah like a physical blow. That's insane. That's politics. Can't you override him? This is your program. It's my program in name only. The funding comes through the city, the building is city property, and every major decision requires Richard's approval. She met Elijah's eyes. I'm sorry, I truly am. But my hands are tied. Elijah felt something break inside him. So I'm just supposed to be grateful. Supposed to accept that I got lucky and Jason didn't. No, Margaret said quietly. You're supposed to understand that the system is broken, and being angry about it is the only sane response. She stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the city lights. But Elijah, if you leave this program, if you give up your spot, it won't go to Jason. Richard will just find someone else to fit his narrative. Your sacrifice won't help your friend. It'll just leave both of you with nothing. The truth of it settled over Elijah like ash. He was trapped, not by bars or locks, but by the weight of opportunity and the guilt of having it when others didn't. I hate this, he whispered. I know, Margaret said. I hate it too. Elijah left her office and went back to his room, to his clean bed and his full stomach, and his guilty conscience. He didn't know that outside, in the dark, Jason was walking back to the underpass with his rejection letter crumpled in his pocket, and a new understanding of how the world worked. He didn't know that the distance between them had just grown wider, that invisible gulf that Margaret had warned him about, the space between the chosen and the forgotten. And he didn't know that the mayor, in his office across town, was already planning the next phase of his narrative, already writing the speech that would feature Elijah as proof that the system worked, that anyone could make it if they just tried hard enough. All Elijah knew was that his room felt too big and too empty, and for the first time since moving in, he missed the crowded warmth of the underpass, where at least everyone was equally cold. The summons came on a Thursday morning, delivered by a woman in a gray suit who introduced herself as Sarah Chen, the mayor's communications director. Mayor Harrison would like to meet with you, she said, standing in the doorway of Elijah's room with a clipboard and a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Tomorrow at 10 a.m. His office at City Hall. Elijah's stomach twisted. What for? Just a conversation. Nothing to worry about. The smile widened but stayed cold. Please wear something nice. We want you to make a good impression. The next morning, Elijah stood in front of his closet, staring at the 3 button-down shirts the program had provided. He chose the blue one, fingers fumbling with buttons that suddenly felt too small and too complicated. Margaret found him in the hallway before he left. Elijah, wait, she looked tired, dark circles under her eyes that makeup couldn't quite hide. Before you go, I need to tell you something. What? She glanced around, making sure they were alone. Whatever he asks you to do, remember that you can say no, you don't owe him anything. Mrs. Harrison, I don't understand, you will. She gripped his arm gently. Just remember, you can always say no. City Hall was a monument to power, all marble columns, and echoing halls and portraits of dead politicians staring down with stern expressions. Sarah Chen met Elijah at the security desk and escorted him through metal detectors and past guards who looked through him like he was made of glass. The mayor's office was on the top floor, behind double doors made of dark wood that probably cost more than Elijah would make in his entire life. Sarah knocked twice, then opened the door. Mr. Mayor, Elijah is here. Excellent, send him in. Richard Harrison stood behind a massive desk, silhouetted against floor-to-ceiling windows that framed the city like a painting. He was younger than Elijah had expected, maybe 50, with silver temples and the kind of smile that had been focus-grouped into existence. Elijah, he came around the desk with his hand extended. Finally, we meet properly. Please sit. Elijah shook his hand and sat in one of the leather chairs facing the desk. Sarah Chen remained standing by the door, her clipboard ready. I've wanted to thank you personally, the mayor said, settling back behind his desk. What you did for my wife was remarkable. True compassion, true character. It's rare to see that these days, especially in someone so young. I just helped someone who needed help, sir. And that's exactly what makes you special. Richard leaned forward, his expression warm and sincere in a way that felt rehearsed. Do you know what I see when I look at you, Elijah? No, sir. I see proof. Proof that the programs we're funding work. Proof that giving people a chance can change lives. Proof that this city cares about all its citizens, not just the privileged ones. He paused. I see a story that people need to hear. The word story made Elijah's skin crawl. He remembered Jason's voice, like we're characters in some story he's writing. I'm not sure I understand, sir. Let me be direct. Richard stood and walked to the windows, hands clasped behind his back. In 2 weeks we're holding a press conference. A big one, national media. The topic is youth homelessness, and the programs we're implementing to address it. I want you to speak at that conference. Elijah felt his mouth go dry. Speak, about what? About your journey. About being homeless, about helping Margaret, about finding hope through Mercy House. Richard turned back to face him. About how this city gave you a second chance, and how you're using it to build a better future. I don't know if I can. Of course you can. The warmth in Richard's voice had a steel edge now. Sarah has prepared some talking points, nothing complicated. Just your story, told in a way that resonates with people. Sarah stepped forward and handed Elijah a folder. He opened it and found 3 typed pages, single-spaced, filled with words that were supposedly his. I was lost before I found Mercy House. I had given up hope. But Mayor Harrison and his team showed me that no one is forgotten in this city. They showed me that compassion and commitment can change lives. Elijah looked up. This sounds like a campaign speech. It's your testimony, Richard said smoothly. Your truth, just organized in a way that's clear and impactful. But I didn't say any of this. Not yet. But you will. Richard sat on the edge of his desk, casual now, almost friendly. Elijah, let me be frank. You're at Mercy House because I approved your application. That program runs on city funding which I control. The building, the staff, the food you eat, the classes you take, all of it exists because I decided it should exist. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Are you saying if I don't do this I'll lose my spot? Elijah asked, his voice barely above a whisper. I'm saying that being part of this program means being part of its mission, and part of that mission is showing the public what we're accomplishing. Richard's smile was back, but it felt predatory now. I'm not asking you to lie, Elijah. I'm asking you to share your story in a way that helps us help more people like you. Elijah looked down at the script in his hands. More people like you, except they wouldn't help more people. They'd help the people who fit the narrative and leave the others behind. Leave Jason behind. What if I say no? He asked. Sarah Chen's pen stopped moving. Richard's smile froze in place. That would be disappointing, the mayor said quietly. Very disappointing. It would suggest that perhaps you're not as committed to the program as we thought. That perhaps you're not the right fit after all. You'd kick me out. I'd reassess your participation. Richard's voice was gentle, but the threat was clear. Elijah, I'm trying to build something good here. Something that helps people. But good programs need public support. And public support comes from good stories. Your story could inspire donations, could inspire other cities to create similar programs. You'd be helping so many people. People like Jason, Elijah thought. Except you won't help Jason because he doesn't fit the story. Can I think about it? Elijah asked. Of course. Richard stood, indicating the meeting was over. Take the script with you, practice it, get comfortable with it. Sarah will be in touch about the press conference details. He extended his hand again. I know you'll make the right decision. Elijah shook his hand, took the folder, and let Sarah Chen escort him out of the building. He walked back to Mercy House in a daze, the script burning in his hands like evidence of a crime he hadn't yet committed. In his room he read through the pages again and again, trying to find himself in the words and finding only a cardboard cutout, a convenient character in someone else's story. Mayor Harrison gave me more than shelter. He gave me hope. He showed me that in this city no one gets left behind. Except people did get left behind. Jason had been left behind. Countless others had been left behind. The whole speech was a beautiful lie wrapped in a truth too small to matter. Elijah was still sitting there staring at the pages when he heard a sound outside his window. Voices, familiar voices coming from the street below. He looked out and saw them. Jason and Marcus and 5 others from the underpass, standing on the sidewalk looking up at the building, looking up at him. Their eyes met, and in that moment, Elijah saw it. The distance Jason had talked about. The gulf between the chosen and the forgotten. It was real, and it was growing wider every day. Jason didn't wave, didn't smile, just looked at Elijah like he was already a stranger, already on the other side of an invisible line. Then Jason turned and walked away, and the others followed, and Elijah was left standing at his window in his clean room with his full stomach and his scripted speech, feeling more alone than he'd ever felt sleeping under a bridge. He didn't know that Jason had come there hoping to see his friend, hoping maybe things could still be fixed. He didn't know that Marcus had tried to talk Jason out of coming, knowing it would only hurt worse. He didn't know that when Jason had looked up and seen Elijah framed in that window looking down at them from his warm room, something inside Jason had finally broken. The last piece of hope that maybe Elijah was still one of them, still understood what it meant to be hungry and cold and invisible. All Elijah knew was that the script in his hands felt like a confession he hadn't written, and the press conference loomed ahead like a cliff he was being pushed toward, step by step, with no way to turn back. The next few days passed in a strange fog. Elijah went to his classes, ate his meals, followed the schedule, but his mind was elsewhere. Every time he closed his eyes he saw Jason's face looking up from the street. Every time he opened the folder with the script, his hands started shaking. He practiced the words in his room late at night, whispering them to the darkness. I was lost before Mayor Harrison's programs found me. I was hopeless before this city showed me compassion. Each time he spoke them, they felt more like lies. On the 3rd night, unable to sleep, Elijah slipped out of Mercy House after curfew. He knew he wasn't supposed to leave the building after 9 p.m., knew it was against the rules, but the walls felt like they were closing in and he needed air that didn't taste like obligation. The city was different at night, quieter, more honest somehow. The daytime pretense stripped away, leaving only the truth of concrete and shadow and the people who lived in the margins. He found himself walking toward the underpass without consciously deciding to go there. His feet knew the way, muscle memory from months of making this journey back when he belonged there. But when he arrived, the space under the bridge was empty. No sleeping bags, no camping stove, no Marcus telling stories. No Jason sitting with his back against the concrete, reading whatever book he'd managed to scavenge. Just emptiness, and the echo of cars overhead. They moved. Elijah spun around. An old woman sat on a bench 20 feet away, wrapped in blankets despite the relatively mild night. He recognized her vaguely, one of the regulars who'd been around the area for years. Moved where? He asked. Down by the rail yard. Cops cleared them out of here 2 nights ago. Said there'd been complaints. She studied him in the dim light. You're that boy, the one who got into the program. Yeah. Your friends talk about you sometimes. When they think I'm not listening, she pulled the blankets tighter. They miss you, but they're mad at you too. complicated thing, missing someone and being angry at them at the same time. Elijah felt something crack in his chest. Did they say anything else? The one named Jason, he says you're not the same person anymore. Says you've got different eyes now. Eyes that look down instead of across. She paused. I told him that's not fair, that you didn't ask for any of this. But he's hurt. Hurt makes people unfair sometimes. Elijah thanked her and walked away, heading toward the rail yard, even though part of him knew it was a mistake. He found them huddled around a fire in an oil drum, burning scraps of wood and cardboard. There were maybe a dozen people there now, the original group plus a few new faces, all of them drawn to the temporary warmth. Jason saw him first. His whole body went rigid. What are you doing here? Jason's voice was flat, empty of everything except a kind of tired anger. I wanted to see you. To talk. About what? About how nice your new room is, about your 3 meals a day. Jason stood up, and the others fell silent, watching. Or maybe you want to talk about your upcoming press conference. Yeah, we heard about that. Word travels. Elijah felt his stomach drop. How did you? People talk, man. People who work in City Hall, people who clean the buildings, people nobody pays attention to. They talk, and we listen. Jason stepped closer, the firelight making harsh shadows across his face. So is it true? Are you really going to stand up there and tell everyone how great the mayor is, how he saved you? I don't want to, but you're going to anyway. I don't have a choice. Everyone has a choice. Jason's shout echoed off the concrete walls. You could say no, you could walk away, you could give up that nice warm room and come back here, be with the people who actually care about you instead of the people who just want to use you. And then what? Elijah's voice rose to match Jason's. Then I'm back where I started, sleeping on concrete, scraping for food. And it doesn't help you, it doesn't help anyone. At least you'd still be you, Jason said, and his voice cracked on the last word. At least you wouldn't be selling us out for a bed and 3 meals. The words hit Elijah like a punch. I'm not selling you out. Then what do you call it? You're going to stand in front of cameras and say the system works, when we're all standing here as proof that it doesn't. You're going to say the mayor cares about homeless kids, when he personally rejected my application. You're going to lie, Elijah. You're going to put on a nice shirt and smile for the cameras and tell pretty lies that make comfortable people feel good about themselves. And you're going to do it to keep your spot in a program that I couldn't get into. That's not fair. None of this is fair. Jason's hands were shaking now. That's the whole point. It's not fair that you got chosen and I didn't. It's not fair that helping one person meant you got a future and I'm still here. It's not fair that the mayor gets to decide which one of us is worth saving based on which one of us has a better story. His voice dropped to barely above a whisper. But you going along with it, pretending it makes sense, pretending it's okay, that's the part that hurts the most. Elijah opened his mouth but no words came, because Jason was right, about all of it. Marcus stood up from where he'd been sitting by the fire. Maybe you should go, Elijah. Marcus, please, you made your choice when you took that room. Marcus said, not unkindly but firm. You can't have both. You can't be one of us and one of them at the same time. It doesn't work that way. The others were all looking at him now, and in their eyes, Elijah saw it. Not hatred, something worse, disappointment, and beneath that a kind of grief, like they were already mourning someone who hadn't quite died yet. Elijah backed away slowly and no one tried to stop him. He walked out of the rail yard, into the night, feeling like a ghost in his own life. He walked for hours, not going anywhere in particular, just moving because stopping meant thinking and thinking meant facing what he'd become. It was nearly 2 a.m. when he found himself sitting on a bench in a small park, staring at nothing. That's where Margaret found him. She was wearing a long coat over pajamas, her hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. No makeup, looking more human than he'd ever seen her. Sarah called me, she said, sitting down on the bench beside him. Said you'd left the building. I've been driving around looking for you. How did you know I'd be here? I didn't, I just kept looking. She was quiet for a moment. You went to see them, didn't you? Your friends from before. Elijah nodded, not trusting his voice. And they hate you now. Yeah. Margaret pulled her coat tighter around herself. I know what that's like, being hated for choices you didn't really want to make. She paused. Can I tell you something? Something I've never told anyone. Okay, 7 years ago I had a son, Daniel. He was 9 years old, bright and funny and full of life. He died in a car accident. Her voice was steady, but Elijah could hear the cracks in it. I wanted to fall apart. I wanted to scream and cry and stay in bed for months. But Richard wouldn't let me. He said we had responsibilities. He said people were counting on us. He said I needed to be strong. I'm sorry, Elijah whispered. I went back to work 3 days after the funeral. I smiled for cameras. I attended events. I did everything he asked me to do, because I thought that's what strength looked like. That's what he told me strength looked like. She turned to look at Elijah, and in the dim park light, he could see tears on her face. But it wasn't strength. It was cowardice. I was afraid to feel my own grief because feeling it meant admitting how much I'd lost. So I buried it. I buried my son and my grief and any part of myself that might have been real. And for 7 years I've lived like that. Like a performance. Like a character in someone else's story. Why are you telling me this? Because I see him doing the same thing to you. Turning you into a character, a story, and I don't want you to make my mistake. I don't want you to wake up 7 years from now and realize you've been living a life that was written for you instead of by you. Elijah felt tears on his own face now. But if I don't do what he wants, I lose everything. The room, the program, the chance at a future. Maybe, Margaret said. Or maybe you lose something different if you do go along with it. Maybe you lose the person you actually are. They sat in silence for a long time. Two people who'd been used in different ways by the same man, trying to figure out if there was a path forward that didn't require selling pieces of themselves. What if we stopped letting him write the story? Margaret said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. What do you mean? I mean, what if at that press conference you didn't read his script? What if you told the truth instead? She turned to face him fully, the real truth, about Jason being rejected. About the program only taking people who fit the narrative, about all of it. Elijah's heart started racing. He'd destroy me, he'd kick me out, he'd make sure I never got another chance. He'd lose his narrative, his perfect story. Is proof that the system works. Margaret's eyes were bright now, alive in a way he'd never seen. And I'd stand with you. I'd tell them about the tumor, about being forced to work through chronic pain, about losing my son and not being allowed to grieve. About 7 years of being controlled and silenced. Mrs. Harrison, you can't. He's your husband. You'd lose everything. I already lost everything that mattered. She gripped his hand. But maybe we can stop him from doing this to other people. Maybe we can expose what he really is before he finds another kid to exploit, another story to manipulate. I'm scared, Elijah admitted. Me too. Margaret smiled, sad and fierce at the same time. But I'm more scared of living like this for another 7 years. Aren't you? Elijah thought about Jason's face in the firelight, about Marcus and the others, watching him walk away, about the script in his folder full of words that turned his life into propaganda. Yeah, he said, yeah, I am. They didn't make a formal plan, didn't write anything down or rehearse what they'd say. They just sat on that park bench until dawn started to lighten the sky. Two people who'd been invisible in different ways, deciding that maybe being seen for who they really were was worth whatever it would cost. When Margaret drove Elijah back to Mercy House, they didn't say goodbye. They didn't need to. They both knew what was coming. In 2 weeks there would be a press conference. National media, cameras and microphones, and Mayor Richard Harrison's perfect opportunity to showcase his compassion. And Elijah and Margaret were going to burn it all down. The press conference was scheduled for 10 a.m. on a Wednesday, in the main hall of City Hall. The room could hold 200 people and every seat was filled. Elijah stood backstage, watching through a gap in the curtains as journalists set up cameras and checked microphones. National news networks, local stations, print reporters with their recorders ready. This wasn't just a city event anymore. Mayor Harrison had made sure of that. Sarah Chen appeared beside him, clipboard in hand, her usual cold smile in place. You ready? She asked. Elijah's throat was so dry he could barely swallow. The script was in his jacket pocket, 3 pages folded and refolded so many times, the creases were starting to tear. He'd read it 100 times, memorized every word. He wasn't going to say any of them. Yeah, he managed. I'm ready. Good. Remember, stick to the script. The mayor will introduce you, you'll share your story and then there'll be a few questions from approved journalists. Simple. She checked something on her clipboard. Mrs. Harrison will be in the audience. The mayor thought it would be nice, since you helped her that night. A full circle moment. Elijah's heart was pounding so hard he thought it might break through his ribs. Where is the mayor now? Green room, going over his remarks. Sarah glanced at her watch. We start in 10 minutes, don't go anywhere. She walked away, leaving Elijah alone with his fear and his choice. He slipped through a side door and found a bathroom, locked himself in a stall and tried to breathe. His hands were shaking so badly he could barely get his phone out of his pocket. He'd bought the cheapest prepaid phone he could find with part of his stipend, specifically for this. One number programmed into it. Jason's phone, the one Marcus sometimes borrowed. He typed out a message. Press conference starts in 10 minutes. City Hall main room. Live stream on city website. Watch it, please. He hit send and closed his eyes. In the green room, Richard Harrison adjusted his tie in the mirror, practicing his smile. Perfect, warm, trustworthy. The smile that had won him 2 elections and would win him a 3rd. Today was going to be a triumph. He could feel it. The story was perfect. The homeless kid who'd shown compassion, who'd been given a chance, who was now thriving. Proof that his programs worked. Proof that he cared. Proof that the city was heading in the right direction under his leadership. And the best part, the kid was so grateful, so eager to please, that he'd read every word of that script without question. Richard had seen it in Elijah's eyes during their meeting. The fear, the need to hold on to what he'd been given. That fear was leverage, and Richard knew exactly how to use it. In the audience, Margaret Harrison sat in the 3rd row, hands folded in her lap, looking every inch the mayor's wife. Hair perfect, makeup flawless, the gray blazer that made her look competent and approachable at the same time. No one could see her heart hammering. No one could see the tremor in her hands that she was fighting to control. Beside her, a journalist from the Times leaned over. Must be proud, having your husband do this kind of work. Yes, Margaret said, her voice steady. Very proud. Liar, she thought. 7 years of being a liar. But not today, not anymore. Sarah Chen stepped onto the stage and the room fell quiet. Camera lights blazed on. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for being here. It's my pleasure to introduce Mayor Richard Harrison. Applause filled the room as Richard walked out, waving, that perfect smile in place. He stood behind the podium, waited for the applause to die down and began. Thank you all for being here today. You know, when I first ran for mayor 8 years ago, I made a promise to this city. I promised that no one would be forgotten, that every life would matter, that we would build a community where compassion wasn't just a word but an action. He was good. Even Margaret had to admit that. His voice had exactly the right amount of passion and sincerity. The audience was already leaning forward, engaged. Today I want to tell you a story about that promise in action. About a young man named Elijah, who at 16 years old was living on the streets, sleeping under an overpass, struggling to survive. Backstage, Elijah listened to his own life being narrated, simplified, turned into a fairy tale. But Elijah had something special. He had character. He had heart. When he saw someone in need, a woman in pain, he didn't look away. He didn't keep walking. He helped. He made sure she got to a hospital safely. He stayed with her, a complete stranger, for hours, expecting nothing in return. The audience murmured, moved by the story. Some were already wiping their eyes. That woman was my wife, Margaret, and that act of kindness changed Elijah's life. Because it showed us, what this young man was capable of. It showed us that he deserved a chance, so we gave him one. Through our Mercy House program, Elijah now has a home, an education, a future, and today he's here to share his story with you. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Elijah Monroe. The applause was thunderous. Elijah walked onto the stage, and the lights hit him like a wall. Hundreds of faces, cameras, the weight of expectations. He could see Margaret in the 3rd row, sitting perfectly still, her eyes locked on his. He could also see, on the side monitor showing the live stream, a counter ticking up. 7,000 viewers, 8,000, 9,000. Somewhere in this city Jason was watching. Marcus was watching. All of them were watching. Elijah stepped up to the podium. The microphone was too high, and Richard adjusted it, putting his hand on Elijah's shoulder in a gesture that looked paternal but felt like a claim of ownership. Take your time, Richard whispered, his smile never wavering. You've got this. Then he stepped back, and Elijah was alone at the podium. the script burning in his pocket, and 200 people waiting for him to speak. He pulled out the folded pages, smoothed them on the podium, looked down at the first line. I was lost before Mayor Harrison's programs found me. He looked up, met Margaret's eyes, saw her give the smallest nod. Elijah folded the script and put it back in his pocket. "That's not my story," he said. The room went so quiet you could hear the cameras whirring. Richard's smile froze. "Elijah, that's not my story," Elijah repeated, louder this time. "I mean, parts of it are true. I was homeless. I did help Mrs. Harrison. I am at Mercy House now, but the rest of it, the way it's been presented, that's not the whole truth." Sarah Chen was moving toward the stage, but Richard held up a hand to stop her. His smile was still in place, but his eyes were dangerous. "Elijah, maybe you're just nervous. Why don't we take a moment?" "I'm not nervous. I'm done pretending." Elijah's voice shook, but he kept going. "The script I was given says I was lost before the mayor's programs found me. But I wasn't lost. I was poor. There's a difference. I knew exactly where I was. I just didn't have anywhere better to go." Some journalists were scribbling notes. Others had their phones out, recording. "The script says the Mercy House program saved me, and maybe it did, but it only saved me. My best friend Jason applied to the same program. He has the same background I do. He's been homeless longer. He's just as deserving. But he was rejected." Richard's smile was cracking now. "Every program has limited spots. We can't help everyone. You can't help everyone, or you won't help everyone who doesn't fit your story." Elijah's anger was building now, burning through his fear. Jason didn't get rejected because the program was full. He got rejected because he didn't add to the narrative. Because Mayor helps multiple homeless teens isn't as good a headline as Mayor saves one special kid. The room erupted, journalists shouting questions, cameras flashing, Richard trying to regain control, but his microphone wasn't on, and Elijah's was. "I'm not special," Elijah said, his voice cutting through the chaos. "I'm not more deserving than Jason, or Marcus, or any of the dozens of people still sleeping under that overpass that got cleared out to make the city look better for cameras like these. I'm just lucky. Lucky that I happened to help someone who happened to be married to the mayor. Lucky that my story could be used. That's not inspiration. That's just random chance, dressed up as compassion." Margaret stood up from her seat. Every eye in the room turned to her. She walked to the stage with her head high, her hands steady now that the moment had finally come. Richard saw her coming, and his face went pale. "Margaret, sit down." She stepped up to the podium beside Elijah. When she spoke, her voice was clear and strong, the voice of someone who'd been silent too long. "My husband asked me to be here today as a prop, as proof of his compassion. The woman who was helped by the kind homeless boy. But that's not the whole story either. Margaret, this isn't the time. I've had a tumor for 3 years," she said, and the room went completely silent. "Benign but painful. It causes episodes of severe pain that require medical attention. I should have had surgery years ago, but my husband told me I couldn't. He said I was needed. He said people in positions of responsibility can't afford to be weak." The journalists were writing furiously now. This was no longer a feel-good story. This was something bigger, so I hid it. I managed the pain in secret, and the night Elijah found me, I'd been hiding in an alley because I couldn't let anyone see me hurting. Because weakness wasn't allowed, because my husband had convinced me that my pain mattered less than his image. Richard's face was red now, anger and panic fighting for control. "You're sick. You don't know what you're saying." "I'm not sick. I'm tired." Margaret's voice cracked but didn't break. "I'm tired of being used. Tired of watching him use other people. We had a son, Daniel. He died 7 years ago, and I wasn't allowed to grieve. I wasn't allowed to fall apart, because it might hurt the campaign, might hurt the image." Some of the journalists had tears in their eyes. The cameras kept rolling. "So when I see my husband doing the same thing to Elijah, turning this boy's life into a campaign ad, into proof that the system works when the system is clearly broken, I can't stay silent anymore. I won't." She turned to Elijah, and her eyes were full of something that looked like relief. "Tell them the rest," she said. "Tell them everything." So Elijah did. He told them about the script he'd been given, about being threatened with losing his spot if he didn't perform, about the other applicants who'd been rejected for not fitting the narrative, about the charity dinner he'd missed to help Margaret, and how that one choice had been turned into proof that he was more deserving than others who'd made different choices or no choice at all. He told them about the rail yard where his friends now slept, about Marcus and the others who were still invisible, about Jason who'd looked up at his window and seen not a friend anymore, but someone on the other side of an unbridgeable distance. "The system isn't working," Elijah said. "It's just working for some people and not others, and the mayor gets to decide who's worth saving based on who has a story he can use. That's not compassion. That's exploitation with good PR." The room was chaos now. Richard had abandoned the stage. Sarah Chen was on her phone, probably calling security, but the cameras were still rolling, and the truth was already out there, spreading through the city like wildfire. In a basement apartment across town, Jason sat on a borrowed couch, staring at his phone screen with tears streaming down his face. Marcus was beside him along with 6 others from the rail yard, all of them crowded around the small screen watching Elijah destroy his own future to tell their truth. "He did it," Jason whispered. "He actually did it." On screen, Elijah was being escorted off the stage by security, but he was smiling. And Margaret was smiling too, even as her husband screamed at her, even as their marriage visibly shattered in front of 200 witnesses. They were smiling because they were finally free. The live stream ended, but the damage was done. Within an hour, the footage was on every news site in the country. By evening, it was trending worldwide. Mayor exposed using homeless teen for political gain. Wife of mayor reveals years of abuse. Joins homeless teen in explosive press conference. Youth program revealed as PR stunt, not actual help. That night, Elijah sat in a coffee shop 3 blocks from City Hall, his few belongings in a backpack, officially homeless again. His phone, the cheap prepaid one, buzzed with a text. "Jason, where are you?" Elijah sent him the address. 20 minutes later, Jason walked through the door. They stared at each other for a long moment, all the hurt and distance and anger of the past few weeks hanging between them. Then Jason sat down. "You're an idiot," he said. "Yeah, you had everything. A room, a future, and you threw it away." "Yeah, for what?" "To make a point, to tell the truth," Elijah said quietly. "And because you were right about all of it, I was becoming someone I didn't recognize. Someone who'd rather have a comfortable lie than an uncomfortable truth." Jason was quiet for a long time, then he slid something across the table, an envelope. "What's this?" "Open it." Inside was a letter. Official letterhead from Mercy House Community Center, but the signature at the bottom wasn't Richard Harrison's. It was Margaret's. "Dear Jason, your application has been approved. Welcome to Mercy House. Margaret Harrison, Director." She sent it an hour after the press conference, Jason said, his voice thick. Along with letters for Marcus and 6 others, all approved. Elijah felt something loosen in his chest, something that had been tight and painful for weeks. "She kept her word," he said. "Yeah." Jason looked at him. "Question is, will I what?" "Keep your word. That you're still you, that you didn't lose yourself in all this." Jason paused. "Because I got my letter, but they sent you one too." He slid a second envelope across the table. Elijah opened it with shaking hands. "Dear Elijah, you are hereby reinstated to the Mercy House program effective immediately. What you did today took more courage than I've seen in years. I'd be honored to have you back, but only if you want to come back. Only if you can do it as yourself, not as anyone's story. The choice is yours. Margaret Harrison." Elijah looked up at Jason, then down at the letter, then back at his best friend. "Together?" he asked. Jason's smile was the first real one Elijah had seen from him in months. "Together," he agreed. And for the first time since this whole thing started, Elijah felt like maybe, just maybe, there was a way forward that didn't require him to choose between survival and soul. The investigation began 3 days after the press conference. Federal and state authorities launched concurrent reviews into the city's youth programs, specifically how funding was allocated and how candidates were selected. The media coverage was relentless. Every news outlet wanted a piece of the story. The mayor who'd built his reputation on compassion, exposed as a manipulator who'd used vulnerable people as props. Richard Harrison resigned on day 5. He had no choice. The city council was already drafting articles of impeachment, and donors were pulling funding from every campaign account. In his resignation speech, he claimed the allegations were exaggerated, that he'd always acted in good faith, that this was a political witch hunt. No one believed him. Margaret filed for divorce on day 6. She also filed a restraining order. The documents included detailed accounts of emotional abuse, of being controlled and silenced, of years spent as a performance rather than a person. By day 10, Richard Harrison was no longer mayor, no longer married, and facing a grand jury investigation into misuse of city funds. And Margaret Harrison was free. Elijah watched it all unfold from his room at Mercy House, a different room this time, smaller, on the second floor instead of the third. Jason had the room next door. Marcus was down the hall. In total, 8 new people had been admitted in the week following the press conference, all of them people who'd been previously rejected. The program was different now. Margaret ran it personally, no interference from City Hall. The funding had initially been frozen during the investigation, but donations from private citizens had poured in after the press conference, enough to keep the doors open for at least 2 years. People want to help when they know the help is real. Margaret had said during the first house meeting, when it's not just theater. Elijah was sitting in the common room working on his GED homework when Sarah Chen appeared in the doorway. He hadn't seen her since the press conference, and for a moment he tensed, waiting for some kind of confrontation. But she just stood there, looking tired and smaller somehow, like someone had let the air out of her. "Can I talk to you?" she asked. Elijah gestured to the empty chair across from him. She sat down slowly, clutching her purse like a shield. "I quit," she said without preamble. "Left the mayor's office. Well, the former mayor's office." She attempted a smile that didn't quite work. "Not much of an office anymore anyway." "Okay, I wanted to apologize for my part in all of this. For writing that script, for pressuring you, for being part of the machinery that turned your life into a campaign tool." She looked down at her hands. "I told myself I was just doing my job. That's what people like me always say, isn't it? Just following orders. Just doing what we were told." "You were doing what you were told," Elijah said. "That doesn't make it right." Sarah met his eyes. "I knew what he was doing was wrong. I knew it the moment I typed up that script and saw how little it resembled any real person's actual thoughts. But I told myself it was fine because the program was helping you, right? You had a room and food and a chance. What did it matter if we shaped the story a little?" "It mattered," Elijah said quietly. "Because it wasn't just shaping a story, it was deciding whose stories get told and whose get ignored. It was using my life to justify a system that was failing everyone except the few who fit the narrative." "I know that now." Sarah's voice cracked. "I'm sorry I didn't know it then, or that I didn't let myself know it." They sat in silence for a moment. Outside, rain had started to fall, pattering against the windows. "What will you do now?" Elijah asked. "I'm not sure. Maybe nothing in politics. Maybe something completely different." She stood up, adjusting her purse. "But I wanted you to know that what you did, standing up there and telling the truth, it mattered. It woke some of us up. Made us realize we'd been complicit in something ugly." After she left, Elijah sat there thinking about complicity. About all the ways people could participate in wrong without meaning to. About how easy it was to be part of a system and never question whether the system itself was broken. That evening, Margaret called a meeting for all the residents, 16 of them now, ages 15 to 19, gathered in the common room. Margaret stood at the front, no podium, no script, just her and her words. "I want to talk about what comes next," she said, "for this program and for all of you." She explained that the city had officially severed ties with Mercy House. The program was now independent, a registered non-profit, no political oversight, no mayoral approval needed for admissions, just a board of directors, with Margaret as executive director and 3 formerly homeless young adults serving as board members. "We're going to do this differently," she said. "No more choosing people based on how good their story sounds. No more using anyone as proof that we're doing a good job. We're going to help people because people deserve help. Period." Someone in the back raised their hand, a girl named Tasha, 17, who'd been admitted 2 days ago. "What about funding?" she asked. "Without the city money, how do we survive?" "Honestly, I don't know yet." Margaret's smile was wry but genuine. "We have enough for now, we'll figure out the rest as we go. But I'd rather struggle with honesty than thrive on lies." Another hand went up. Marcus this time. "What happens to us if the money runs out?" "We find more money, we get creative. We ask for help from people who want to actually help, not people who want to use us." Margaret paused. "But I'm going to make you a promise." As long as I'm running this place, no one gets kicked out because they're not useful enough. No one gets rejected because their story isn't simple enough. And no one has to perform gratitude to earn basic human dignity. The room erupted in applause. Later that night, Elijah and Jason sat on the fire escape outside their floor, looking out at the city lights. "You think it'll work?" Jason asked. "The program, I mean, you think it can survive without the city backing it?" "I don't know," Elijah admitted, "but I think it has a better chance of surviving as something real than it ever did as a political prop." Jason pulled his jacket tighter against the cold. "I still can't believe you did it, threw away everything for the truth." "I didn't throw away everything. I just threw away the fake version." Elijah glanced at his friend. "The real version is here, with you and Marcus and everyone else who actually matters." That's surprisingly deep for someone who failed the GED practice test twice. "Shut up." They sat in comfortable silence, the kind of silence that only exists between people who've seen each other at their worst and stuck around anyway. "Hey Elijah." "Yeah, thank you." Jason's voice was quiet but firm. "For seeing that I mattered too, that we all mattered, not just you." "You're my brother," Elijah said simply. "Of course you matter." Inside the building through the lighted windows they could see their new community. Tasha helping Marcus with homework. Margaret in her office going through grant applications, the cook preparing tomorrow's breakfast. All of it real, all of it imperfect, all of it honest. The investigation into Richard Harrison continued for months. In the end he was never charged with any crime. Technically he hadn't broken any laws. He'd just broken people, bent them into shapes that served his purposes, and called it public service. But his political career was over, his reputation was destroyed, and maybe Elijah thought that was justice enough. 3 months after the press conference, Margaret legally adopted Elijah. Not for publicity, not for a story. The adoption was quiet, done in a judge's chambers with just the two of them present. "I'm not trying to replace your mother," Margaret said afterward, as they stood on the courthouse steps. "No one could do that." "I know," Elijah said, "but you're giving me something she would have wanted me to have, a family, a future, a chance to be myself." "You gave me that too," Margaret replied, "the courage to be myself again. I think that makes us even." 1 month later Margaret adopted Jason. She was creating a different kind of family, not based on blood or obligation or political advantage. Based on choice, based on truth, based on the simple radical idea that people were worth loving for who they were, not who they could be shaped into being. On the 1-year anniversary of the press conference, a journalist from the Times came to do a follow-up story. She interviewed Elijah and Jason and Margaret and several other residents. "What's the biggest difference between the program now and the program before?" she asked Elijah. He thought about it for a moment. "Before we were supposed to be grateful, now we're allowed to be human." He paused. "Turns out human is better." The article ran with the headline, "1 year later the program built on truth instead of image." It got less attention than the original exposé. Truth, it turned out, was less sensational than scandal, but the people who read it understood what mattered. Mercy House wasn't saving anyone. It was just giving people space to save themselves, and maybe that was enough. The sun was warm on Elijah's back as he carried another box of donated clothes into the community center. Not Mercy House, that building was still running, thriving even, under new management. This was something different, something he and Jason had started 3 years ago. No name on the building, no grand mission statement, just a place where people could get a meal, take a shower, charge their phone, and not have to perform gratitude to earn basic human kindness. "Where do you want these?" A volunteer called from the doorway, carrying bags of toiletries. "Storage room, left side," Elijah called back. "Thanks, Maria." He was 28 now, tall and lean, with lines around his eyes from squinting at spreadsheets and grant applications. He'd gotten his GED at 17, college degree at 22, social work license at 25. But the education wasn't what qualified him for this work. The years on the street qualified him. The memory of what it felt like to be invisible qualified him. Jason emerged from the kitchen, wiping his hands on his apron. He'd taken a different path, culinary school, apprenticeships at restaurants, and now head cook at their center. Every meal he prepared was made with dignity, no cafeteria trays, no processed food, real cooking, real care. We're feeding 63 tonight, Jason said. Maybe more if that cold front comes through, like they're predicting. We've got enough. We've always got enough. Jason grinned. I make sure of that. At 29, Jason had filled out, confidence replacing the hunched defensiveness of his youth. He still remembered what it felt like to be hungry. That memory informed every portion he served. The door opened, and Margaret walked in, her hair almost entirely gray now, but her step still strong. At 62, she'd retired from running Mercy House 2 years ago, handing it over to Tasha, who'd graduated with a degree in non-profit management and had more ideas than Margaret could keep up with. But Margaret hadn't really retired. She spent 3 days a week here, at Elijah and Jason's center, doing intake interviews and helping people navigate the maze of social services. We got the grant, she said, waving a letter. The one from the Colson Foundation, $50,000 for the year. Elijah let out a breath he'd been holding for weeks. That'll cover the lease and then some. Which means you can stop looking so worried all the time. Margaret squeezed his shoulder. Have a little faith. We've been doing this long enough to know it works. It works because we work at it, Elijah countered, but he was smiling. They'd learned over the years that running an honest program was harder than running a political one. No photo ops meant less attention, no inspiring speeches meant less funding, but the people they helped stayed helped. The changes were real, and somehow that made the constant struggle worth it. Evening came, and people began arriving for dinner. No sign-in sheets, no questions about why they needed help, just food, served with dignity, and the offer of other services if wanted. Elijah watched from the doorway as Jason moved through the serving line, chatting with everyone, remembering names, asking about their day. He watched Maria, the volunteer, help an elderly man find a jacket that fit. Watched Margaret sit with a young woman who was crying, just listening, just being present. No cameras, no press releases, no narrative about heroes and victims. Just people helping people because it needed to be done. You're thinking too loud, a voice said behind him. Elijah turned to find Marcus, now 31, wearing a suit that marked him as someone with a day job and responsibilities. He worked as a paralegal now, helping with housing rights cases, but every Friday, he came here to volunteer. Just thinking about how different this is, Elijah said. From how it was, Marcus nodded. Yeah, better I think. Quieter, more real, less impressive to look at though. Depends on who's looking. Marcus gestured toward the room. To them this is pretty damn impressive. Hot food, clean clothes, someone who treats them like they matter. He paused. That's what was missing before, you know. At all those fancy programs with their press conferences and their narratives, they never treated us like we already mattered. They treated us like we'd matter once they fixed us. And we weren't broken, Elijah said quietly. Just hungry and cold and tired. Marcus smiled. Still are, some of us, but at least now we can get a meal without having to audition for it. The dinner wound down around 8 p.m. Volunteers cleaned up, guests filtered out into the night, some to shelters, some to apartments, some to cars or doorways or the warm grates outside office buildings. Elijah watched them go, knowing he couldn't save them all, knowing that wasn't even the point. The point was witnessing, seeing people who the world worked very hard to keep invisible, offering kindness without conditions, building something that lasted because it was true, not because it looked good. Before locking up, Elijah walked through the empty dining room one last time, checking that everything was secure for the night. On one of the tables, someone had left a note written on a napkin. Thank you for treating me like a person. You have no idea what that means. Elijah folded the napkin carefully and put it in his pocket. He had dozens like it at home, kept in a box, read whenever the work felt too hard or the funding too uncertain. Outside, Jason was waiting by the car, smoking a cigarette he was supposedly trying to quit. Ready to go, he asked. Yeah, they drove in comfortable silence, the city lights sliding past the windows. At a red light, Jason spoke. You ever think about how different our lives could have been? If you just read that script. If we'd played along. Sometimes, Elijah admitted, all the time. Jason took a drag from his cigarette. I probably would have hated you for years, and you probably would have been successful and miserable, living someone else's life. Instead we're just poor and honest. Poor is relative, Jason said. I'm not sleeping under a bridge. I'm not scraping for food. That makes me richer than I used to be. The light turned green, and he accelerated. Besides, honest is underrated. People don't appreciate it until they've lived with lies. At home, a small apartment they shared with Marcus, because rent in the city was criminal. Elijah made tea while Jason started on tomorrow's meal prep. This was their routine: work all day, cook all night, sleep when they could. Margaret called around 10, like she did most nights, just checking in. They talked for a few minutes about the grant money, about a woman she'd helped get into transitional housing, about the little victories that kept them going. "How are you?" Elijah asked, because someone had to ask her that question too. "Tired, happy, both at once." Margaret's laugh was warm. "Get some sleep, honey. Tomorrow's another day." After hanging up, Elijah sat at the kitchen table with his tea, thinking about the woman on the napkin who'd felt like a person today. About Jason in the next room, chopping vegetables for people he'd never meet but would feed anyway. About Margaret, who'd lost a son and a marriage and a comfortable life, but had found something that mattered more. About all the people who'd been helped quietly, without fanfare, without speeches about their worth or their potential, or their inspiring journey. Just helped, just seen, just treated like they mattered. Outside, the city hummed with its million stories, most of them invisible to anyone who didn't look closely. But Elijah and Jason, and Margaret and Marcus, and all the others who'd been invisible once, they knew how to look. They knew which stories needed telling, even when no cameras were rolling. They knew which lights mattered, even when they didn't shine on stages, and they knew that real change didn't happen in press conferences, or political speeches. It happened in donated coats and hot meals, and someone remembering your name. It happened when you stopped trying to save people and started trying to see them. Years from now, there would be no monuments to this work, no plaques or awards or inspiring documentaries. The center would keep running, or it wouldn't. The people would keep coming, or they wouldn't. The world would keep turning either way, but for tonight, 63 people had eaten dinner served with dignity, and tomorrow there would be more. That was enough. That had always been enough. Elijah finished his tea and went to bed, and dreamed not of spotlights or stages or perfect narratives, but of something better. Something real. He dreamed of hands reaching across darkness, of lights that didn't demand performance, of being seen, not for what you could become, but for who you already were. And in the morning he'd wake up and do it all again, because some stories don't need to be told. They just need to be lived.